All right, everyone. Welcome to our Read with Sharon book club for the month of February. This month we read James by Percival Everett. I hope everyone got a chance to read it. It wasn't a very long book, which was nice, but packed full of stuff. And I'd like to welcome you guys to discuss this with us today. So, with that, I just wanted to sort of start. We do not have the author today. We've been trying to work with him, but he's a tough guy to get a hold of. But I can tell you, it looks like between now and the end of the year, we will have the author every month. We've been working pretty hard to do that. It takes a bit to get everybody's calendars coordinated and aligned, to read the books in advance. It's a lot of work. So, but we've got at least right now through October, I think. We're missing maybe 1 month. That's really good. So with that, I'd like to get started. I think James, I think you're on the phone and you'll be joining us in a bit. But I wanted to just sort of get started with some initial thoughts I had about this story. As you guys all know, it was sort of an alternative. Let me get this person in the waiting room. An alternative sort of narration or story of Huck Finn's adventures. And I'm a huge Mark Twain fan. It's interesting. It's been a really long time since I read Huck Finn, and I forgot probably more than I remembered. But it kind of brought a lot of this back in terms of reading it, but from another perspective. It almost reminded me of the movie Wicked in that way. You know, you don't really know what you're reading until you kind of get to the end and you go, okay, now I kind of sort of I'm following where I'm going. But what I found interesting about this book was the amount of symbolism and the depth of the story with so few words. It's a pretty fascinating read for me. I really appreciated, how Everett brought this big gym to life in a way that we hadn't thought about, and the juxtaposition of fear and anger, of freedom and slavery, and a lot of the themes that sort of traverse the story. I just found fascinating, and I really enjoyed the literary perspective of it. Sometimes the story is a bit brutal for me, and keeping track of the characters drove me nuts. I don't know about you guys, but I had a really hard time with who everybody was. I had to keep notes, and I went back, and I'm like, okay, I got Easter, I got Emmett, I got Norman, I got, I don't know about you guys, but the characters, there were just a lot of them. And I don't recall if you guys do or not. Were there that many characters in Huck Finn's stories as well? I think there might have been, but it's been so long, I don't really remember. Um, but with that, anybody have some comments you want to start us off with? Carol, you're always the one that jumps in on these things, no?
I'll jump in. I was muted and my face was off because I was eating a little dinner. Yeah, it was an exciting way to see the story alternative. I did listen to most of it and then read.
Okay.
It was a little hard to listen to because of the dialect in the way it was spoken. But I will say, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the musical Big River, because that's Huckleberry Finn's story. And my son was actually in the musical in Jacksonville, Florida, but that was on Broadway. So that's another, if you're a Mark Twain fan, another really cool to think about. But thank you. And is Marjan coming?
Yeah, we'll discuss that at the end of
because
the night.
she said she was busy. Oh, yay!
Yeah, well, we'll discuss it at the end of the night. Let's not get distracted from the story. All right.
I mean, I'm
Okay, but so if we're on this point, it's interesting. Carol brought up the dialect, and I'll come to you in a second, Nancy. I see you. One of the things I found interesting was I did have a hard time. Of course, I read. I don't really necessarily listen to audiobooks that much, but I had a hard time even in reading it with that dialogue. And I've read, a number of other, I'll meet these people in, of stories. I think Dubois writes that way as well. And reading in that dialogue, it's really tough. It slows you down. You have to sort of say it in your head. I also found, and maybe I'm crazy, but I found the formal. I understand why the author did it because it established the identity of James for all of us as readers. But I found it not believable. I'm sorry, I just did because I think he was almost too formal. But maybe I'd like to hear a different perspective of that in terms of how he supposedly talked when he wasn't around whites, but also in terms of how the use of his ability to speak formally, his ability, James is in that way, his ability to write, his ability to read, really took on the character or took on a role for him in terms of his identity and being able to express who he was and how he was feeling in words. That was a very interesting tool for, literary tool anyway, to sort of help us really understand the intricacies of this guy. I'm gonna hit Nancy first, Diane, because she had her hand up, like waving at me, and then I'll come to you. So yes, Nancy.
Well, I listened to it and I thought it was easier because the dialect really drew the line. Yes, it may have been exaggerated on both ends. Do we really think that all of the slaves acted stupid just when they were around the white people? I think he exaggerated that end, and I think he exaggerated the formal English. But I appreciated listening to it because I thought that having the difference in the dialogue, in the dialect, really changed the way you listened to the dialogue. It changed what those words meant and what he was saying and how he was relating to people. So I thought it was a good book to listen to because of
Mhm.
that.
Well, that's interesting too. I guess I hadn't thought of it this way, but it also really helped, I guess, establish his audience in terms of who he was talking to. Um, I found it distracting and harder to read, but I also felt that, it made it easier to read when you're in his head, because he certainly wasn't thinking in those words. He was thinking formally. He wasn't thinking in the sort of the slang that he used. But I found it, like I said, every time I got to it, I had to like take a step back and say, okay, I had to say it to myself out loud in order to be able to hear it. So interesting. Diane.
Well, I'll apologize ahead of time, but I have really strong feelings about this book. And partly, Huckleberry Finn was a favorite from childhood. I saw Big River. I love Big River. But I generally am not real fond of retelling other people's stories. That always comes across as a lack of originality to me. The N word is fingers on the blackboard for me. And I feel like there are some words we need to retire and not use gratuitously. And in some books I've read where they're talking about current dialogues, that seemed to be not as offensive to me. But I basically thought that it, I think it's time that we not have so much tribalism or this versus that. And I felt like the whole like code switching idea does nothing, it didn't do anything to promote the greater good for all of us. So I actually I quit reading it. I have a lot more time behind me as a reader than I do in front of me. So I'm pretty picky about my books, and I didn't think the dialect was done very well. So that's where I was. It kind of hit multiple things that I'm sensitive about, and that's what I thought. Although I did read, a lot of people are real interested in it and thought it was great. So I'm here tonight because I want to hear what people thought.
Right. Yeah, I understand your viewpoint. The N word, I guess, didn't bother me as much as I think the blackface, minstrel, that whole section there, kind of I thought was overdone in my mind. And I'm seeing Jean and others, shake their head like they hear your thoughts on that too. I thought, okay, now you're just making a point. I felt a bit like, Diane, did you read Horse with us when we read Horse by Geraldine Brooks? And I felt that she had done something similar in that book where she had made this character overly racist in a way that I thought it was too much. You know what I'm saying? It went beyond exaggeration, and I think that scene, the blackface, the whole minstrel thing did that for me there. But I also on the other side of it appreciated his point in that he was trying to basically, in my mind, strip this guy James down to where he was just dealing with raw anger, and that he wanted to make him really, really mad. So the angrier he became, the less he was afraid of his fear, if you know what I'm saying. And so there's that tension between anger and fear. I think he used that specifically to get to that. So we could see what anger looks like when the fear is stripped away at the end, when he's just murdering and doesn't have a conscience about it. Um, and I'm not quite sure in my mind if he was, I think he was trying to humanize Jim or James in a lot of ways. But I think that for me, in somewhat, it had a bit of an opposite effect in terms of it almost dehumanized, desensitized him, to be responsible or feel that sort of accountability and moral. He kind of lost his moral compass a bit, I think. But that's just my read on it. But I think that's what the purpose of the book is to get us to think about things in those terms, I think.
Yeah. So he did a good job of getting everybody talking about it,
Yeah, there's that.
you
Right.
know?
Great topic for Black History Month. Jean,
I think what dawned on me when I first started to read and I hit the dialogue and I had to stop and kind of like, almost like a little kid read it out loud in order to get the cadence. And once I got into that mindset, then it was easier as I went along. When I got to the point in the book where he started to talk about the fact that he was, speaking one way when he was talking to his owner and the other way when he was around his friends, and then he could read and write and all of these things. And he started quoting all of these very almost esoteric kind of authors. And I thought,
Voltaire.
yeah, exactly. But like from memory. I thought that it was almost as though the author was working in extremes, hyper extremes to show the difference. And although it kind of felt fake to me because I couldn't really grasp that either would be logical, as I read along and I started to, the N word and everything else, I don't like it. And it really does viscerally go through me when I read it. But considering the time, considering the issues, considering the situation, it didn't feel gratuitous in the sense that that was what happened and what they were called. And at the minstrel show, I have to say, that kind of threw me over the edge. I was like, this is starting to feel really like he doesn't know where to take it at times when they were on the river and off the river and on the river and off the river. And when they got to that point, I thought, oh, come on, really?
Yeah, it's outrageous, right?
Yes, it felt so
overdone, outrageous.
extreme.
Yeah.
It felt so extreme. And I wanted to say to the author, do you really think we're buying this now? But what frustrated me most was when I got to the end. And I kind of, turned the page and it was over. And I went back and I thought, there's got to be another chapter. I don't care if it's 2 pages long. I felt as though it got me to a certain point and then walked away.
Mm.
That the closure factor for me was a little kind of, and like I just read 250 pages of you trudging and killing and completely losing any moral compass that you started with. And now you leave me. So I don't know if he did that because there's another book coming, or, like sometimes they do that in movies or series,
Right.
they hang you. But that kind of left me feeling unsatisfied as far as he finally makes it, but what happens? Where do we go? How does he now move on from everything that he has just gone through?
And then Huck, that I felt that came way too early in the book, as well. The realization or the discussion about Huck being his son. I would have, I don't know, but you guys and Diane and whoever else is on, Evelyn, up here on. Eileen, I mean, I would have pushed that further out, in my mind, 'cause I felt that it should have been in the last 75% of the book as opposed to up front, much later than it was.
Yeah.
But I wonder if he did this in some ways deliberately, Jean. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Deliberately to push the boundaries, just as he wanted, or he felt that James in real life, if he was a real character, was pushed to his boundaries. He's trying to push us to, like I said, that theme. I kept coming across this theme of fear and anger, right? This
Oh, yeah.
this subdued, put your head down and take it, as opposed to, no, I'm not fear, I'm afraid anymore. I'm so angry. I can't be afraid anymore. That was a real big, I think, a big part of this. Of course, obviously, freedom, but freedom really isn't freedom, right? That was another theme that really came across. He was free to kind of go, even though he was running, but he had freedom, right? And a lot of these situations, but he was always enslaved in some way, either by his friend Norman, or by these Duke and King, or whoever they were, or by whomever, or also by the fear of not ever seeing his wife and child again.
Right.
That was, freedom's not free unless you can live as you want with your family, and I think that's was part of it. So his goal was freedom, and he ultimately got that. And interestingly enough, I think the author equated the Mississippi River with that journey to freedom. And he thought he was getting beyond that Mississippi and was going to get it through that channel. But in the end, he took a road, he took a path. It wasn't the river that set him free. It's, through his own propelling things that he could control. I think there was some theming around that as well. Not, no, again, I think there was a lot of symbolism and a lot of, theming under here that wasn't necessarily that wasn't as obvious, but obviously that's the way he tried to structure the book and the story.
Right.
Any other thoughts on this topic in terms of the themes? Yes, Diane.
Well, do you wonder if he could have written a book that was as successful in gaining attention and readers if he didn't do it on Twain's shoulders, And does he wonder about that himself? I mean, there's no answer to that, but he's got really good conflicts and topics, and could he have done it in another way?
Well, I know that from what I could read about and his writing on this one, that he was a huge Mark Twain fan, and so I think that's part of. I think he thought he was paying tribute to Twain in this regard. I mean, I can't speak for him, but that's what it came across to me. That if Twain could have written it this way in 18 whenever, maybe he would have. But I see what you're getting to, right? Is that he kind of, as you would say, bastardized, is that the right word? A classic story in a way in which, could either offend or could impress. And I think I think we have different takes on some of that. Christine, do you have something you wanted to add? I see you've got your mute off. Anybody?
Well, I'm going to steal something from somebody who I'm texting to say, speak up. Um, and just like the whole river and the back and forth and the here and the there, and it was almost a comedy of errors. And a friend of mine and I who's on this call, were liking it to Don Quixote. Like, some of these tales were so crazy and far-fetched, and I was like, is this satire? Like, what is this? It was not like Don Quixote fun. It was more the dark side of Don Quixote. So anyway, that's what I
Any
have.
thoughts on that?
It kind of reminds me of the idea of tilting at windmills,
Mhm.
fighting all of these things that or don't even know are in front of you, but you're just fighting everything because you have this goal in mind. Whether the goal is logical or not, it doesn't really matter. You're so caught up in the fight that that's just where you're headed. That's a really interesting point.
I would like to just agree with Diane in the fact that there's a lot of modernizing, in quotes, of a lot of really, really important stories. And I would call myself a purist. I took my son, who's actually 32 now, and has just gone to a call back in New York for the Lead and Bye Bye Birdie. But in any event, I took him to see Carmen at a big theater in Boston when he turned 13, and they just butchered it. and it just gets me furious. And sometimes it works, but yeah, I don't know. And as far as the N word, sometimes it is important to use something at the time in context. I published something about the Oregon Trail, and the editor insisted that I use the word Native Americans in it. And I said, but that's not what they were called at that time. And it's a real catch-22 in that regard. And I don't know, but everything's done. I don't know how it's like one of the top books on the New York Times bestseller list. If you could explain that to me. And so hard to get online in the library. Why?
They're
A lot of us have that much objection. And I was just on a sidebar, I was just wondering if anyone saw the movie Nickel Boys, that Colson Whitehead wrote the book.
We read the book.
We read the book.
Yeah.
We've read the book here at the book club. I think it was
So
5 years
I
ago.
remember, and I saw the movie the other day, and talk about dialogue and not really being able to understand a lot of things and using the N-word. Is it okay if a Black person's writing and they're using the N-word? So.
This book is actually going to become a movie. They're working on it now.
Well, that'll be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
It's been a very long time since I read any of the Huckleberry Finn books, but I never drew a conclusion that James was Huck's father. Did I
love that
miss that in everything I've read in my past?
I think that's the author. I think it's Percival Everett's impression. I think. I mean, I don't know, but that's what I believe in terms of how this was done. Because I thought, when in the beginning when I was reading it, I thought he was telling him at first that he was kind of like a father to him, and then I realized, no, it's not what's going on here. Sharon, wake up. And also, I don't remember Huckleberry Finn's stories being this chaotic. This felt very chaotic to me in a lot of ways. I mean, like I said, I could not keep track of characters at all. I tried, but I think so. But if I get them wrong in discussion, that's why. Kathy.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm doing it backwards, and maybe I shouldn't admit this to a book club, but I've never read Huckleberry Finn.
That's
I'm
okay.
wondering if I'm the only one here who never has. I plan on reading it. It's on my to my TBR list, but I might feel different about it after I read the original, the classic. But all in all, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was good. But again, without reading the first book, I might not have the same perspective that many others are coming from.
Well, Kathy, it's been so long since I read it. I mean, I think I was in high school or something.
Yeah.
It's been a long time. So,
Well,
yeah, that's like, I'm gonna tell you how many years ago that is. But it's a long time.
yeah, right.
So it's almost like it's new to me in some ways too. Like I said, I just don't remember it being that chaotic. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it as well. So, Nancy.
I live in St. Louis, and I kept trying to look on the map to see where the heck were they, and that was hard enough. And the other funny thing was for me is we had a boat on the Mississippi, and there is no way they could have kept jump. They're pulling dead bodies out of the Mississippi that people drown. Carla knows, she lives here also. People go swimming in the Mississippi and they drown, and they pull them out of the water. This is not a quiet little river that you float down. We lost a propeller the first time we took a boat out. So didn't lose it. I mean, it broke, but from debris. So I had a little trouble with that whole concept. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, I don't know. Maybe Huckleberry Finn was equally um, unrealistic. But at any rate, the way we read it, they were just floating down this nice little river. I'm like, no.
I compare that. I haven't done one of those riverboat cruises on the Mississippi. It's like a highway. To me, it's this big, wide, muddy highway. It's huge. It's a huge river, huge, right? It's a very big place. So, yeah, I don't know. But I think I'm pretty sure that Twain spent a lot of time on the river. Maybe it was a little less obnoxious when, 100 years ago or 150 years ago. I don't know. It could very well be. So in terms of some of the symbolism, did anybody have any other they wanted to bring up that they recognized? For example, the river itself being sort of, the rumored or the de facto path to freedom, when in fact we learn as we go through the story that it isn't, that it wasn't, that, the further they traveled on it, the more complicated and, you know, um, confused their lives became, more difficult it became. It was not really freedom. It didn't provide them the autonomy that he was looking for at all. It was just an escape route, but it didn't really lead to where he wanted it to go. Any other symbolism that anybody picked up on in the story that was cool they wanted to share? No? What about, I had some notes here, I gotta find them. What did I do with them? Oh, this issue with the pencil.
Oh,
Yeah, right. The pencil was a big deal, right? Something as simple as a pencil, it represented, in my mind, it gave what's his name? Big Jim a power, right? It made him feel like he could express himself, he could write. It was important to him. But yet it also represented sort of the death of this kid who tried to help him to get it, right? It really did, represent a lot of guilt for him in a lot of ways. I think a lot was sacrificed for something as simple as a pencil. I found that to be an interesting tool in this book, symbolism in this book. Jean and then Christine.
I think the one thing that dawned on me with the pencil was that the minute the person had the pencil, whoever it was, they were suddenly seen as human as opposed to slaves, or they were, as you said, they had a power that they were not supposed to have. But the whole concept that he was killed over this pencil,
Again, extreme,
it
right?
seemed to me like another example of extremes. Everything seemed very overly dramatic. Now, that may have been purposeful.
I think so.
You know,
I think so
um,
too.
but for me, I was kind of like, what? Okay.
But
And to
it's
be honest,
something,
the fact that the person, the pencil fell on the floor and started to roll across the porch, and he scooped it up and put it in his pocket. That that slave owner was that adroit to have realized where it went and what happened. Like, to me, it seemed very like a huge thing over something that was pretty trivial. But
but
again,
back then it wouldn't have been trivial, especially for someone who had no rights and no rights to own anything. So I think Percival Evans making it such a big
mhm,
deal was to show these people had nothing, nothing.
right.
Even a
Yeah,
pencil
the
was,
extreme inhumanity of it all.
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
that was what I take from that.
yeah,
And maybe the arbitrariness of the punishment that was doled out.
yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
The whole book seemed to seem that way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot of that. I
Yeah.
mean, on both sides, just so extreme. Um, and I, maybe I'm not bright enough to figure out what the literary purpose of that was, but it clearly was to build a tension in the character and within us as readers, right? I think in some capacity. Christine, the other Christine, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. You had expressed concern or surprise at the precision of his language when he was not doing the Ebonics part. But then there was the part where he actually taught the little children in their slave group how to speak Ebonics. Now, to me, that's what they would have heard their entire life. I mean, the
Right.
slave community was deathly afraid of the overseer. And the fact that these kids ever learned non-Ebonic language while being in that situation, I found to be just too surprising for words.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's the one thing from the very beginning of the story that sort of set me
Yeah.
off, right? But then I realized, well, how I think he was trying to use it, which was to show sort of, the identity versus, an extreme way in which you behave around an overseer or masters that make you feel small and that you are afraid of and that fear in order to be compliant versus when you can be yourself. I think that's what literally he was trying to, I can't say the word right. That's what he was trying to do. But like Jean says, when you first looked at it, it was kind of like, whoa. As you said, you got to teach them to speak the other way. Like, where have they learned that?
Yeah,
It would have been the
exactly.
other way, him teaching them how to speak proper English as opposed to
Right.
the dialect that they had grown up with.
Oh my God, what did I
Yeah.
do?
But again, I think it's all part of that symbolism or that way in which he was trying to weave a tale, making it very complicated. I did like though the conciseness of his language. I mean, he didn't parse a lot of words. Um, he didn't overwrite like we can often find with so many people. Colson Pride has another one that doesn't overwrite. As opposed to Tanisha, whatever his last name is, he overwrites big time. So I appreciated that sort of not overwriting something like this because it could have gotten really laborious. And again, I did struggle with the number of characters. I had a hard time keeping them straight and the personalities of them, because he didn't have a lot of time to develop any of that. He spent his time really developing James. So that's who you knew. You really didn't even know Huck that well. He's just a kid, right? That you felt bad for, you felt sorry for. But we didn't get into a lot of his character either, I don't think. And where he kept disappearing, I thought that was weird too. He disappeared and come back. I mean, like, how does that work?
Always ended up finding James in the
Right.
most odd.
Kind of like my dog, Miriam, you've been awfully quiet this evening.
Who is?
Miriam, she's usually very voiceless. We can't hear you, dear. Oh, there you go. There you go.
I was offered the option to review the book and listen to a clip and decided that I wasn't interested. Then I
Okay.
heard the audio clip and the reviews, which by the way, got tons of really great audiobook reviews. I'm going to guess it's going to get the annual awards and stuff like that. It was the dialect. It was switching the various dialects that decided that I wasn't interested in reviewing it. But what's interesting to me was the audiobook review was a very literary, very accomplished review. That's not me. I want to just enjoy this story. So I'm not big on reading derivatives. That's what this is. So I didn't read it. That's it. But I did listen to the audio, pieces of the audio, and I was.
You guys there?
That's it.
Okay. I lost my audio. All right. Anybody else have any other comments? Have we beat this one to death?
I don't know. It almost seemed not only historical fiction, but a little bit of like magic realism or fantasy or something, because it was pretty fantastical in a way and very, like you said, extreme.
Right. Have you guys, anybody read The Water Dancer?
Oh, that's yes.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Mhm.
It had a bit of that in here, although he
Yeah, for sure.
overwrites. And Percival doesn't overwrite, so Everett doesn't overwrite. But
I actually liked his writing. I mean, I thought that the voice of James was maybe his intellect and his voice coming through.
Right.
Author, yeah.
I would just like to say that Tom Sawyer was written in 1876 and Huckleberry Finn 1885. So I think it is believable that they could have been rafting down a part of the river that could have been quieter. That's almost 175 years ago.
But it's the debris in the river. It's not, isn't
Is that the
traffic.
age?
But I
There's
think
big logs that float down the river all the time. That's why I was laughing, because I thought it's not the boats that would kill them. It's all the
Yeah.
logs that float through the river.
And I'm
Well-
thinking like his house, Mark Twain's house, is in Hartford, Connecticut, like not too far from my house. But isn't some of this kind of autobiographical?
It is.
Tom Sawyer?
Yeah, I mean, from
Yeah, so-
Mark Twain's perspective, or Sam
Right.
Clemens, or whatever his name was. Yeah.
So I think that, yeah, I get you about the Mississippi, but it's such a the longest river in the country. So
So has anyone ever done, besides me?
You just muted yourself.
I don't know what's going on here. Has anybody ever done the riverboat or a boat down the Mississippi? Yeah, Christine, it's not what you think. You think it's going to be this like Nancy says, this nice, lovely little ride. No, it's not. It's a lot of traffic. It's a lot of mud. It's a lot of debris. It's just this big,
It's huge.
big
Well, and
river.
the other thing that I thought was interesting was that, and this is something that I don't think we've talked about, but he pointed out that they could go to Illinois, but even though they were legally free, they weren't really free. And I thought that's something that people need to understand. Those of us that live in this area understand that, but just because they were legally freed, could be free, they were still going to be hunted there because of the area of Illinois that they were in. So they were down in that southern Illinois area. So which is a lot more rural. It wasn't like, so I just thought that was an interesting concept that we don't talk about very often. Just because the slaves were free didn't mean that they weren't hunted.
Even
And
up
then
north, I thought I read that somewhere, that if you were a runaway slave, even up north, you could be, brought back.
Because of that, I can't remember the
Yeah,
name.
there was a law, there was a
It was
rule
the
or law.
1850. It was an 1850
Dred
Repatriation
Scott.
Act. What's it called?
Dred Scott.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that allowed them to go up and reclaim their property. And that was, I think it was 1850, that was passed. So about 10 years before the war. People who had escaped up in Philadelphia in particular, they were trying to get the folks out of Pennsylvania and bring them back. There's a lot of that because, again, chattel property. And I think that he's trying to make that point too here, in terms of just what that felt like and the anger and fear that went with that. So, all right. Does anybody else have anything else on this topic? Because otherwise I'll stop recording.
Has anybody else read Erasure, which is his first book or an earlier book? So it's
saw
what
the
the movie
movie.
American Fiction is based on.
Is it similar to the movie?
It is similar to it is. I want to talk about a book that is hard to read. There are sections of that book that I had to fast forward through. I could not listen to it.
What's it called, Mackenzie? Erasure?
It's Erasure.
I read it too and 100% agree.
Like there are parts that I loved and I loved the movie, but holy moly, did I have to fast forward through some stuff because I could not. But I think I was a little bit more forgiving of the derivative nature of this one just because I had read that one first. I don't know. But I also think that that's why it's popular, is because he was solidly riding on some coattails of getting exposure of Erasure from the movie American Fiction.
And I was mad at him for using the dialect when that's what he was opposing in Erasure. And then he caved in Erasure. And that book where he wrote under his pseudonym, I 100% skipped it.
Yeah.
100%.
Same.
I could not
Same.
read it.
Could not.
But I still liked the book, absent reading that. Yep. 100%.
Completely agree.
All right, so I'm going to have to do that one. You said it's hard. All right, I'm adding it to my list of thousands of books I got to read.
in that
That's
book, he
what I
was
do.
Who was that from?
he was somewhat professorial. He had a niche market as an author, and everybody was getting all of these accolades who wrote in a dialect. And so he decided after a long time to cave and go that route.
So that is a fictional story, right? It's not autobiographical, or
Correct.
I believe that's true.
Pure
Yes.
fiction, from my understanding. The movie is
Writing in
fantastic.
dialect is really tough. I mean, you have to be really good. Thomas Pynchon wrote in dialect, and it's hard to read. So,
It's always been controversial. I know Paul Laurence Dunbar got in trouble for writing his poetry in dialect. It just all underlines how sensitive language is.
Well, we got a bit of it last month in Rednecks as well. I mean, it's a different, I mean, it was this Appalachia sort of dialect that sort of threw us all off a bit, I thought. Nancy?
I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I saw on PBS, PBS did an interview with him, and I think it might be on YouTube. Um, it wasn't, there wasn't anything memorable for me out of the interview, but I thought if any of you are interested in him as an author or his personality, you may want to check. It's not long. It's that, I think it was on Facebook Live, so they're never very long, but it was just sort of interesting.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, let me stop this.